Ladies and gentlemen, when leaders rise to power, they often believe that their influence is unquestionable, unstoppable, and permanent. But history teaches us something different. Even the strongest leaders face a moment where reality breaks through the noise. Today, we examine what is waiting on the horizon, something Donald Trump may not fully realize yet. And the moment he does, the political landscape may shift in a way that could shake his entire foundation. The reality that Trump may not yet fully grasp is that the power of public opinion, one of the greatest weapons in modern politics, is shifting under his feet. For a long time, he stood as a master of narrative, a figure who could shape thinking through sheer presence, bold statements, and relentless domination of the media space. But public consciousness is not static, and the generation that once consumed information passively has evolved into a society that questions, compares, analyzes, and verifies before accepting anything as truth. This change is not subtle, it is seismic. And many leaders, not just Trump, are struggling to understand its full implications. We must acknowledge that the political arena he conquered in 2016 is not the same battlefield he is walking onto today. Back then, information was fast, but not fully filtered. People were reacting emotionally to the moment. Economic frustration, cultural dissatisfaction, distrust of established leadership. Trump spoke to a desire for disruption, and for many, disruption felt like hope. But over the last decade, technology has transformed not only how people receive information, but how they interpret it. The younger generations, digital from birth, do not simply absorb messages, they decode them. They look for patterns, motivations, and agendas. They compare multiple sources. They understand the difference between emotional momentum and measurable outcomes. And as more of these individuals enter the conversation, their thinking is influencing the climate of the nation in ways that no single political personality can fully control. This shift in consciousness is not unique to one political side. It's not about left or right, it's about awareness. We are witnessing a population that is learning to separate personality from performance, volume from value, and emotional appeal from long-term impact. Trump once excelled because he understood emotional momentum better than anyone else in the room, but this new generation is not inspired merely by emotional shockwaves. They are inspired by competency, stability, transparency, and results that improve daily life. They are looking at leadership the way investors look at markets, measured, analytical, and skeptical of promises without proof. There is something powerful happening psychologically. People today are more aware of how influence works. They are learning to identify bias, manipulation, media framing, and emotional triggering. They can see when a leader is speaking to their pain versus speaking to their potential. And when a population grows conscious of how persuasion works, persuasion loses its ease. It becomes necessary for a leader not just to inspire emotions, but to justify belief. Trump built a movement on charisma and the energy of rebellion. But public opinion now requires something more than rebellion. It requires direction. This is where the shift becomes threatening for any leader who relies heavily on public emotional synchronization. You see, emotional politics works best when the audience is not asking deeper questions. But today, they're asking, where is this leading? How does it help me tomorrow? What changes in my life if your words become policy? These are not the questions of followers. They are the questions of thinkers, and thinkers are harder to move with theatrics alone. Philosophically, this marks a return to something ancient, people, reclaiming responsibility for their own interpretation of society. In many ways, the public is stepping into the role of evaluator rather than reactor. They are becoming the jury rather than the chorus. And when a leader who has built power on controlling public perception suddenly faces a public that cannot be controlled the same way, that becomes a moment of reckoning. If Trump realizes that the public is no longer captivated simply by fire, but now seeks foundation, That moment may be more unsettling than any headline, poll, or opponent. Because when a nation starts thinking for itself, no leader can rely on yesterday's influence to win tomorrow's battle. And that is the shift every modern politician must face. When the people become thinkers, leadership must become deeper. What Trump may not realize yet is that the very political system he disrupted has spent the last several years studying him. When he first entered the national stage, his approach was unlike anything the modern political arena had ever encountered. He rewrote the rules, disregarded traditional norms, and proved that charisma, dominance, and constant visibility could outweigh experience, policy depth, or conventional strategy. But systems, whether political, economic, or even biological, have a natural tendency to adapt. And once something changes the environment eventually adjusts to neutralize or balance the disruptor. That is exactly what has been happening in American politics since Trump's rise. In 2016, Trump walked into a battlefield that was unprepared for him. Media organizations were unsure how to respond, political opponents underestimated him, and institutions operated as if they were still dealing with a familiar style of leadership. He benefited from a landscape that didn't yet understand the psychology of his strategy, rhythmic messaging, emotional galvanization, narrative saturation, and the ability to occupy the public psyche 24 hours a day. But after nearly a decade of experiencing that approach, the system is no longer caught off guard. Journalists, political strategists, campaign communications teams, and even government institutions have adjusted their frameworks. They now understand his playbook. They've learned the patterns. They've built countermeasures. If the political arena in 2016 was analog, the arena now is digital, faster, sharper, and better armed. Media outlets no longer simply react, they anticipate. Opponents no longer play defense, they prepare offensively. Even public agencies, courts, and watchdog institutions have evolved their processes, not to target Trump personally, but to address a new era of political intensity that he accelerated. It is the natural evolution of a system that encounters something powerful. It adapts in order to survive. There is a psychological dimension to this as well. Trump succeeded in large part because he was unpredictable. Unpredictability is a disruptive advantage. When others don't know what you will do next, they cannot prepare strong counters. But unpredictability loses its potency when it becomes familiar. If someone throws a curveball repeatedly, eventually the batter learns how to recognize the spin. If someone attacks from the same angle long enough, defenders learn how to shield against it. Trump used surprise to dominate the narrative and unsettle his opponents. But surprise cannot last forever when the world has had years to analyze every tactic, every impulse, every strategic instinct. Philosophically, this reflects a universal truth. No movement remains the unknown threat for long. Once society understands the disruption, it begins building structures to manage it. Trump didn't just change politics, he forced politics to evolve in response. Candidates now campaign differently. The news cycle moves differently. Campaign messaging, voter data, psychological framing, and even the timbre of political conversation have changed. His presence accelerated this transformation. But now the transformation is pressing back. What may surprise him is that the new resistance is not emotional. It's structural. It's not outrage-driven. It's procedural. It's not reactionary. It's strategic. And a strategic opponent is far more difficult to defeat than a shocked one, because strategy does not get flustered. Strategy does not panic. Strategy observes, evaluates, and waits for the right moment to strike. This is the stage where many leaders, even historically powerful ones, encounter their greatest challenge. Not the fight to gain power, but the reality of facing an environment that has learned how to counter them. The system he once outmaneuvered has now been studying him long enough to develop instincts of its own. So the true test ahead is not whether Trump can continue being who he has always been, but whether he can evolve as quickly as the system he transformed. Because in politics, as in nature, the one who adapts last is the one who loses first. One of the most profound realities Trump may soon face is the truth that loyalty in politics has an expiration date. For a long time, his influence operated on a powerful emotional currency, commitment, allegiance, and the belief that standing with him meant being part of a historic cause. And to be fair, many did believe that. Many still do. People stood behind him at great personal cost because they felt seen, heard, and represented in a way other leaders had failed to deliver. But while loyalty is powerful, it is not unconditional. It is shaped not only by belief, but by pressure, consequence, circumstance, and personal survival. And when political storms grow stronger, even the most devoted allies begin to reassess what their future looks like standing next to the lightning. In the early years, many saw alignment with Trump as a pathway to political opportunity, visibility, and influence. But as time passed, something predictable began to happen. Those same allies started facing consequences, not in the abstract, but in their personal lives. Legal investigations, financial pressures, social backlash, professional opportunities lost, reputations damaged. These are not ideological problems. These are human problems. And when humans are under pressure, their priorities shift. History shows this over and over again. Loyalty lasts as long as the cost is bearable. The moment the cost becomes greater than the benefit, loyalty changes form. Some of Trump's closest supporters have already changed course. Some have negotiated deals. Some have publicly softened their alignment, and others have stepped away entirely. And while Trump has often interpreted these shifts as betrayal or weakness, there is another interpretation worth considering. People are not turning against him because they suddenly dislike him. They are turning toward their own survival. This is not new. It is the natural rhythm of political life. Those who were once willing to fight are now asking, what happens to me if I stay standing here? It is a question every human asks when they feel the heat of consequences. Psychologically, loyalty is strongest when people feel safe. When the leader provides protection, direction, and a sense of shared fate, loyalty becomes stable. But when the environment becomes unpredictable, when legal battles intensify, risks increase, and outcomes become uncertain, supporters begin looking for lifeboats. Not because they are weak, but because they are human, and human beings are wired for self-preservation. Even the most committed individuals must eventually answer the question, what will happen to me if I continue down this road? That is where many around Trump currently stand. There is also a deeper philosophical point here. Loyalty thrives in seasons of momentum, but it is tested in seasons of consequence. When the wind is at your back, everyone wants to join the march. When the wind starts blowing against you, when the crowds thin, when the cameras turn away, when legal outcomes become real, that is when loyalty reveals its true size and texture. Some remain, others step aside, not because they changed, but because the season changed. Trump may not have fully realized yet that many of those who once protected him, amplified him, and built their reputations around him are now analyzing their options like chess players navigating a board where every move carries risk. They are calculating not just loyalty, but survival. They are weighing not just belief, but consequences. And in that calculation, some are making decisions he may interpret as betrayal, when in reality they are simply responding to the system adapting, the pressure increasing, and the cost of standing close to him growing heavier by the day. This is where the shift is most sobering. Trump built his empire on personal allegiance, but personal allegiance is fragile when the environment is unforgiving, and if he has not yet absorbed this truth, it will hit him hard when key figures continue to step away, not with anger, but with self-protection. Because in the end, Loyalty lasts until the price becomes too high, and when that moment arrives, even the strongest alliances begin to tremble. For a long time, Trump lived in a political reality where legal matters were treated as just another part of the narrative. A headline to challenge, a story to counter, a perception battle to win. In many cases, that approach worked for him. He understood that if you could dominate the narrative, you could soften the impact of the facts. If you could control the emotional atmosphere, you could control how people interpreted events. But what he may now be realizing is that there comes a point when the legal system transitions from a stage of public argument to a place of institutional consequence. Courts do not debate. They do not negotiate perception. They do not respond to crowd size, polling numbers, or social energy. They respond to evidence, process, and the rule of law. And that shift from public theater to legal reckoning is a shift few leaders are prepared for. In the past, Trump was protected by something incredibly powerful. The belief that the system was too slow, too fragmented, or too uncertain to catch up with him. And in earlier years, that reasoning may have been justified. But today, the legal landscape is no longer theoretical. It is tangible, it is moving, it is organized. Prosecutors, investigators, judges, and legal institutions have spent years studying every angle of the Trump era, not just in terms of political behavior, but in terms of how the legal process itself needs to evolve in a time where political figures communicate at the speed of social media and influence millions in an instant. Legal systems move slowly, but they learn deeply. And once they begin acting, their momentum is not easily stopped. Psychologically, this shift is profound. In political conflict, the opponent can be attacked. In public debate, the narrative can be flipped. In press coverage, messaging can be reframed. But the courtroom is a different battlefield. Judges are not swayed by emotional talking points. Evidence does not bend under media pressure. And legal consequences, once decided, exist beyond the reach of public spin. Trump built much of his political influence on his ability to reshape reality through language. Tweets, speeches, interviews, statements that could redirect attention and fire up his base. But legal systems operate in a different dimension. Language is only secondary. Facts, documentation, and procedural outcomes take primary control. This is where the awakening becomes uncomfortable. Trump is facing not just political rivals, but institutional processes that have matured. Investigations have become legal cases. Criticism has become indictments. Allegations have become filings. And these are not dependent on whether the news cycle is favorable. They move regardless of who holds the microphone. The system, once reactive, has become assertive. And it is a different opponent entirely. Philosophically, this is the moment where the concept of accountability becomes real. Every powerful figure eventually encounters a situation where influence cannot outmaneuver structure. Kings in ancient history faced it when councils stripped their authority. Generals faced it when military tribunals ruled against them. Modern political figures face it when courts say, "Your words are no longer the argument, your actions are." Up to this point, much of Trump's strategy has relied on public solidarity. If enough people support me, I cannot lose. But legal consequences do not measure support, they measure law. And if that realization has not fully settled in for him yet, it may hit hardest in the coming months and years. Because when a man who has built power through narrative discovers that there exists a system immune to narrative, the challenge becomes not emotional, but existential. This is what makes the legal landscape so different from any opponent Trump has faced before. It does not shout, it does not campaign, and it does not care about optics. It is quiet, steady, procedural, and deeply rooted. And no matter how large the audience, how passionate the supporters, or how sharp the messaging, The courtroom remains unmoved. The essence of this moment is simple. Influence can shape opinion, but only law can shape outcome. And when the legal process becomes the battlefield, the rules of engagement change. Because in that arena, truth is not what a crowd believes, it is what the evidence proves. One of the most significant changes unfolding beneath the surface of American politics is that Trump is no longer facing an opposition that is surprised by him. When he first emerged as a dominant force, his critics were disorganized, fragmented, and largely dismissive. They underestimated him. They assumed political experience and traditional strategy would be enough to counter a new, unconventional figure. And because they underestimated him, he was able to outmaneuver them. He knew how to seize attention, how to command the emotional climate, and how to weaponize the speed of media in a way no opponent was prepared for. But over time, opposition matures. Individuals learn from defeat. Institutions analyze what they missed. And slowly, almost quietly, resistance becomes smarter, more coordinated, and more strategic. That is the moment we are witnessing now. Trump is no longer facing the opponents of 2016. He is facing individuals and organizations that have spent nearly a decade adapting to his presence. They have studied the rhetoric, the timing, the persuasion patterns, and the emotional triggers. They understand the rhythm of his political combat. And more importantly, they understand that emotion alone cannot counter emotion. If a leader fights with intensity, the opponent must fight with intentionality. If a leader dominates narrative through volume, the opponent must respond with precision. If a leader destabilizes the environment, the opposition must learn to stabilize itself. Over the last several years, that shift has occurred. This does not mean that all opponents agree with one another on policy or ideology. In fact, many have deep internal differences. But they share a common realization. Trump represents a political force unlike the traditional challengers of the past, and defeating someone like that requires unity of purpose, not just unity of belief. That mindset has fundamentally changed how his critics operate. Many of them, whether political leaders, activists, legal strategists, or media analysts, are now approaching their role not as reactors, but as architects. They are building systems, frameworks, voter strategies, communication models, and campaign blueprints designed specifically for Trump-style politics. In other words, they are preparing not for the last election, but for the next one. Psychologically, this is a profound evolution. In the beginning, most opponents were trying to beat Trump on the emotional field he created. They responded to provocation with outrage, to rhetoric with rhetorical fire, to disruption with indignation. But as time passed, a deeper truth emerged. You cannot defeat a master of emotional politics with emotion alone. You counter influence by controlling environment. You counter unpredictability by increasing discipline. You counter rapid narrative shifts by refusing to be dragged into the drama. And the opposition, slowly but clearly, has begun adopting these principles. Philosophically, this growth mirrors the evolution of a society facing a new force. When a disruptor enters the scene, the first instinct of the environment is confusion. The second is resistance. But the third, if the system learns, is transformation. Trump was the catalyst for that transformation. Whether someone loves him or hates him, they cannot deny that his dominance forced political institutions to evolve. And evolution produces competitors who are stronger, sharper, and more prepared the second time around. This development may become Trump's greatest challenge because it changes the nature of the conflict. In the past, he could overpower opponents through sheer narrative force. But now he is facing opponents who are not simply reacting. They are planning. They are coordinating legal pressure, media strategy, voter outreach, and institutional resistance with a consistency that did not exist before. The battlefield has become more intellectual, more disciplined, and more strategic. And the danger for Trump is that strategy, once established, is very difficult to break with emotional momentum alone. At the core, this shift reflects something every leader eventually encounters. Once a figure becomes strong enough to reshape the environment eventually reshapes itself to withstand them. Trump changed the game, but now the game is changing him. And the question that now hangs over the future is simple. Will he adapt as fast as those who have adapted to him? Because when resistance becomes strategic, survival requires evolution, not repetition. There is a deeper shift happening across the country, one that transcends parties, personalities, and campaign slogans. America is tired. Not tired in the sense of defeat, but tired in the sense of emotional exhaustion. After years of political battles, social division, culture wars, 24-hour news cycles, online conflicts, and constant crisis-level engagement, the nation is looking for something many leaders haven't fully addressed: stability. People want peace, predictability, and progress. They want leaders who not only fight loudly, but also lead effectively. And Trump may not yet fully grasp that the very energy that once fueled his rise, the constant intensity, the unfiltered confrontation, the never-ending sense of combat, has become, for many, something they simply no longer have the emotional space to maintain. This shift is human, not ideological. People can love a political figure, admire their strength, and still reach a point where they want life to feel normal again. They want to go to work, build families, grow businesses, and live without feeling that every day is another chapter in a political crisis. The nation has been running emotionally at maximum for too long, and people are looking for leaders who offer not just a battle plan, but a roadmap. Not just slogans, but solutions. Not just intensity, but improvement. This is a psychological evolution in the American voter that every modern candidate must understand. Trump's strength has always been disruption. He entered the national stage not as a manager of the system, but as a hammer swung against it. And in a moment of national dissatisfaction, people wanted the hammer. They wanted something that shattered old structures and forced the country to confront long-ignored issues. But the paradox of disruption is that it is most valuable at the beginning, not the end. Disruption is a spark. Governing is the fire. The spark can start the movement, but it cannot sustain it forever. Eventually, people want something built from the ashes. They want a sense that life is becoming better, safer, calmer, and more constructive. When we look across the political landscape today, we see something telling. Even those who still stand behind Trump, who still believe in him, often speak less about building and more about fighting. Less about the future and more about the enemy. Less about unity and more about survival. That is not because Trump cannot articulate a vision, but because the culture that has formed around him has been trained to exist in crisis mode. Crisis mode is powerful, but it is not permanent. Societies can only live in adrenaline for so long before the body demands recovery. Right now, the American body is asking for that recovery, and many leaders on both sides have begun to adjust to this emotional truth. Philosophically, we are witnessing what psychologists call the return to equilibrium. When a system is thrown into chaos, its natural instinct is to stabilize. Trump brought force, and the nation is now seeking balance. That balance does not come from silencing political passion. It comes from refocusing it. People do not want to stop caring. They want to start progressing. They are not rejecting engagement. They are rejecting exhaustion. They want strength, but they want it applied toward building, not just battling. And here is where the moment becomes critical for Trump. If he continues speaking as if the country is still in the same emotional state it was in 2016, he may find that the energy he once activated no longer responds the same way. Because the audience hasn't disappeared, it has changed. Many Americans are no longer asking who is strong enough to fight. They are asking who is stable enough to lead. That shift is subtle but monumental. Leaders rise when they understand not just the moment, but the mood. And the national mood has evolved. If Trump recognizes that the nation is seeking healing, direction, and normalcy, not silence but steadiness, he may adjust. But if he continues to lead as if the country still lives in the emotional climate that created him, he may discover that the greatest battle he faces is not against his critics, but against a country moving into a new psychological season. Because at the end of the day, a nation can only stay in war mode for so long before it demands peace. And leaders who do not evolve with that demand may find themselves out of sync with the very people they once inspired.